Shalom, my name is Tony Robinson of Restoration of Torah Ministries, and I want to welcome you to our Haftarah Connections Lecture Series. And this week we're going to be dealing with Parashat Miqqeitz, which extends from Genesis chapter 41 verse 1 through Genesis chapter 44 verse 17. And the Haftarah reading extends from 1 Kings chapter 3 verses 15 through 1 Kings chapter 4 verse 1. And as we do every week, we're going to say, why was 1 Kings chapter 3 verse 15 through chapter 4 verse 1 chosen as the Haftarah reading, or the reading from the prophets, for the Torah portion entitled Miqqeitz? Okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to look for the themes. Okay? Now this Torah portion is one, the Haftarah reading for this Torah portion has given many people difficulty in trying to find the connection. Okay? In other words, the Haftarah reading is basically the story about the two harlots who had a child, and Solomon's wisdom in determining which one was the true mother. And on the surface, it may not seem like the Haftarah reading has many connections to the Torah portion. But again, what we have to do is we have to just, whenever we run into that situation, excuse me, you need to just know that there are some connections there, and that you really are just going to have to kind of hunker down and really put on your thematic thinking cap and try to find some connections. Now usually whenever you run into this situation where there are seemingly not a lot of similar words, phrases, events, circumstances, situations, usually when that occurs, the connections are primarily concerned with some deeper concepts that may not be readily apparent at first glance, or if you're just kind of making a superficial reading of the Torah portion. So we're going to have to really dig down, but we're going to see we will see a few just kind of, you know, similar easy to see similar words and phrases. So let's start off with 1 Kings chapter 3 verse 9. It says, I gave birth while she was in the house. This is one of the harlots speaking. Then it happened the third day after I had given birth that this woman also gave birth. Okay, so we're going to key in on the fact that I gave birth. Okay, and the third day after I had given birth, this woman also gave birth. Okay, now when you're studying thematically, now at first glance, many of you may not have seen the connection. Some of you may have, but for those of you who didn't, you may be thinking, well, how is this thematically connected to the Torah portion? Well, this is what you do. When you study thematically, when you're looking for thematic connections, what you should do is you should use one passage as a basis for searching for information in the other passage. Okay? Let me repeat that. Because we know that there are going to be thematic connections between Torah portion Miqqeitz and the Haftarah reading. Otherwise 1 Kings 3:15 through 4:1 would not have been chosen as the Haftarah reading, right? Okay, so we already know that there's a bunch of connections, right? So if you're having trouble finding these connections, what you need to do is this: use one passage as the basis, or as use it as the basis for searching for connections in the other. Now watch this. This verse, 1 Kings 3:9, is talking about the birth of the birth of children, right? It's talking about the birth of a child, right? Right? It's talking about the birth of two children, right? So right there, just by reading this in this passage, it gives you a hint, or it gives you a starting point for where to look for a connection in the Torah portion, okay? So all you need to do is ask yourself, based on what you've read now in 1 Kings chapter 3 verse 9, is there any place in a Torah portion that talks about the birth of children, and in particular two children? And the answer is yes. Genesis chapter 41 verse 50, and I shall read. And to Joseph were born two sons before the years of the famine came, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore to him. So boom, boom, jackpot, we got it right there, okay? So this is a thematic connection, right? This is a clear, objective thematic connection. In both readings, 2 children were born, okay? Thematic connection, we're on the right track. But what we want to do is we want to look for more thematic connections, right? So how about 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 15? I'll read it for you. It says, "Then Solomon awoke, and indeed it had been a dream." Now, this verse, 1 Kings 3:15, it follows the dream that Adonai had given him, where basically Adonai said, hey, because you didn't choose riches and wealth and your enemies to be delivered into your hand, I'm going to give you everything you asked for, and I'm going to make you the wisest man, and you're going to be the richest man too, right? Now, that is in the Haftarah reading. Now let's look at Genesis chapter 41, verse 7. "So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream." Stop right there. It doesn't get any clearer than that, right? I mean, these 2 passages are clearly thematically connected. Listen to this. 1 Kings 3:15 versus Genesis 41:7. "Then Solomon awoke, so Pharaoh awoke. And indeed, it had been a dream. And indeed, it was a dream." Right? So need I say more? And again, this is the second connection. So again, as I'm trying to communicate as best as I can, this is by divine design. Okay? This is Adonai's supernatural reference system. Right? This is his supernatural reference system. What he wants you to do is, when you're reading 1 Kings 3:15, at some point when you're reading that verse, he wants you to think, man, you know, I have seen that, I've heard that phrase somewhere before, and then, you know, then a Ruach wants to come and quicken into your mind, into your heart, Genesis 41:7, okay? Or, if you're reading Genesis 41:7, and you read, "So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream," you're supposed to read that and go, man, I think I've read that someplace before. And then, oh yeah, someplace in Kings, something about some women, a child or something. Right, you know, boom. So you get the point. But this is his divine reference system. This is his divine reference system. And this is the reference system that we want to use. This is the reference system that we want to lift up and exalt and use as how we study the Bible. I mean, it's good to look at footnotes and go and read what other people think every once in a while, right? Every once in a while, but that shouldn't be, you know, if your main study involves picking up your Bible and all sorts of reference works, now I'm not against that. I'm saying if that's the main way you study, and if every time you study the Bible, you're mainly pulling all these other reference books so that you can see what other men have to say about the scripture, you're missing the point, okay? And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I'm just saying that Adonai wants you to be primarily concerned with his references, because we want, and he wants you to know what his interpretation of a pattern of a passage is. And the way you get his interpretation, it should become abundantly obvious now, is that we find his reference sources, and his reference sources are given through thematic connections. And that's the beauty of studying thematically, because we're going to follow him. He's going to lead us through the scriptures, and in this way we are taught by Adonai. Okay, so let's look at another one. Let's look at 1 Kings chapter 3 verse 12. It says, "I have given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has not been anyone like you." This is what Adonai is saying to Solomon. Now what I want to do is I want to key in on that first phrase, "I have given you a wise and understanding heart." 2 aspects of wisdom there, right? It's thematically connected, first of all, to Genesis chapter 41, verse 33. Where it says, "Now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and a wise man and set him over the land of Egypt." 2 aspects of wisdom there, 2 aspects of wisdom in 1 Kings chapter 3 verse 12. I did not take time to look up the Hebrew to see if the words were exactly the same or not. That's something that you may want to do, but still we see the connection is clear. All right, how about we're going to look again at 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 12, but instead of looking at the phrase at the beginning of that verse where it says, I have given you a wise and understanding heart, we want to key in on the second half of that verse where it says, so that there has not been anyone like you. There hasn't been anyone like you, Solomon. That's what Adonai said to him. Okay, so that's our clue. We go, we look in the Torah portion. Do we see anywhere in the Torah portion where it says anything about no one's been like you before? And we look in Genesis chapter 41, verses 33 and verses 38 through 39. And I'm smiling here and I'm having a good time because I'm so excited about this Torah portion and this Haftarah connection combination here. Because as a matter of fact, it's going to take us 2 lessons to get through this one because it's beautiful. There's beauty in this. And oh, how I wish that those of you who are watching there, I wish you were right here so that I could be looking at you and so that we could have that interaction, you know, that only comes from being in front of people. That if only we could have that interaction. It just does so much for me, you know, as a teacher, bringing the word out when I can see and draw upon the reactions of folks. But you guys are out there, and I'm in here, and so we can't do that. But I'm still excited. I'm still excited because this is beauty here. This is awesome. But anyway, let's get back to it. There has not been anyone like you. Okay. Well, Genesis, as I said, Genesis 41, 33, and 38 through 39. Listen to what Pharaoh says. Can we find such a one as this? Boom, right there. Can we find such a one as this? That's clearly thematically connected to there has not been anyone like you. Okay? You are exclusive. Joseph, you are in a class all by yourself, just like Solomon is the point there. A man in whom is the Spirit of God, inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. There is no one as discerning and wise as you. And so we get those 2 aspects of wisdom again, right? No one as discerning and wise, but then not anyone as discerning and wise as you. Again, thematically connected to there has not been anyone like you. Beautiful. And see, in this way, we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that this Torah portion, Miqqeitz, and this passage in 1 Kings 3:15 through 4:1, we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that it is by divine, it is divinely decreed that we compare and contrast these 2 passages, that there's something in 1 Kings 3:15 through 4:1 that is very much connected to what's going on in Torah portion Miqqeitz. This is Adonai all the way. Okay? 1 Kings chapter 3 verse 9, it says, Solomon said, for who is able to judge this great people of yours? Who is able? Now right here, what I'm doing is I'm actually stepping out of as a matter of fact, even with 1 Kings 3:12, and I forgot to mention this, I'm actually stepping out of the Haftarah reading. Because the Haftarah reading, it's from 1 Kings 3:15 through 4:1. I don't have that slide pulled up right now, so I hope I'm right. But what I'm doing is I'm actually jumping out of the Haftarah reading a few verses before the first verse in the Haftarah reading. You say, well, how can you do that? Well, the reason why I can do it is because I'm the Torah teacher. No, the reason why I can do that is because when you read the Torah, when you read the Haftarah readings, you have to remember that when they chose these Haftarah readings, they took a particular section or phrase out of a reading from the prophets, okay, as the Haftarah reading. But you need to remember that whatever Haftarah reading you're looking at, that there were verses in front of it and there were verses behind it, right? In other words, sometimes with the Haftarah readings, they didn't choose, you know, they chose one section, but sometimes they actually could have started a little before or kept it going a little bit more. In other words, sometimes you can still find other connections to the Torah portion in verses that are immediately preceding or immediately after the actual Haftarah reading, okay? In other words, the Haftarah reading is given within a context. And so quite often it is a good idea for you, when you read a Haftarah reading, that you develop the context of the Haftarah reading by reading some of the verses before the Haftarah actually starts and after the Haftarah actually ends. And what you're going to find often is that there are other thematic connections. And this is such a case. All right, 1 Kings 3:9, for who is able to judge this great people of yours, is clearly thematically connected to Genesis chapter 41, verse 40, where it says, when Pharaoh said to Joseph, you shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. The common connection there obviously being the fact that you have a ruler who's going to rule or judge over people. Okay? I'm telling you, I'm really excited about this. Now, okay. Now we clearly have all these thematic connections between Joseph and Solomon, right? So now what I want to do is I want to remind you to remember the primary reason why thematic connections exist, okay? This is what I've learned from Adonai. This definition I'm about to give you of the primary reason for why thematic connections exist is something that I feel that Adonai has shown me. This is not something, in a standard dictionary or whatever. The primary reason why thematic connections exist is to show equivalence between people, places, things, and events, okay? This person is equal to or equivalent to this person. This thing is equal to or equivalent to this thing. This event that happened is thematically connected to, equal to, or equivalent to this event, okay? That's what's going on here. So clearly, Joseph has been thematically connected to Solomon. In other words, we could say that Joseph equals Solomon, or he's equivalent to Solomon for some reason. And remember, the second reason why thematic connections exist is so that once you connect two things, you will learn something that you would not have learned apart from the thematic connection. So that's how Adonai does that. Okay? All right. Let's look at 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 18, where it says, then it happened the third day after I had given birth that this woman also gave birth. Okay? The third day after I had given birth, this woman also gave birth. It is clearly thematically connected to Genesis chapter 42, verse 18, where it says, then Joseph said to them, the third day, do this and live, for I fear God. And I know I'm getting excited now because this is getting into one of the major areas of research that we do here at Restoration of Torah Ministries, and that is Messianic prophecy and the idea of the death, burial, and resurrection of the Messiah in 3 days. And so what we're going to do is we're going to spend a little time here. Right here, we actually have a teaching on resurrection on day 3. This is the Torah's teaching. Now this teaching is all over the place. You're going to notice, as you read the stories in the Torah, you're going to notice that there are many stories where it's going to mention the number 3 and the bringing forth of life. Okay? The number 3 and the bringing forth of life. And this is obviously in anticipation of the work of the Messiah, who would die, be in the tomb for 3 days and 3 nights, and then resurrected. Okay? Here are 2 such examples. Then it happened the third day after I had given birth. Right there you have coupled the number 3 with the aspect of life coming forth from the womb, right? Life coming forth from a womb on day 3. And then it goes on to say, after on the third day after I brought forth life, right? This woman brought forth life. That's a double expression of life on day 3, on the third day. This is the Tanakh's hidden teaching on resurrection on day 3. When the child came forth from the mother's womb, that is a picture of coming forth in life. Okay. Now Genesis 42:18 has the same teaching. where it says, then Joseph said to them the third day. Why did he say the third day? How come he didn't say to them the second day, the fourth day, the fifth day, the sixth day? How come it happened in 1 Kings 3:18? How come it happened on the third day after the woman had given birth? How come it wasn't the second day or the fourth day or the fifth day after the woman had given birth? It's the third day. And remember, when we study thematically, we can see multiple times when this pattern is repeated over and over and over and over and over again. It's Adonai speaking to us and trying to teach us something deeper. And so in the Torah and in the Tanakh, Adonai didn't literally say that the Messiah would be dead, buried in a tomb for 3 days and 3 nights and then resurrected, but nonetheless, he gives us the foundational understanding of resurrection on day 3 is fully developed in the Torah. So this concept is actually started from Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1 is the first example teaching us resurrection on day 3. This is not a New Testament concept. You will have all sorts of anti-missionaries, chief of which is Tovia Singer. Bless his heart. I understand what he's trying to do, and I understand the angst that he has against Christianity. But anti-missionaries, they state that the idea of the resurrection of Yeshua has its roots in paganism. That's the idea that they try to sell us. That the idea of a man resurrecting in 3 days, that it is totally pagan to the core, when in fact it is clearly and easily taught and seen to be taught through the Tanakh. Those were 2 examples right there. Here's the first example that teaches us that life and resurrection has something to do with the number 3. Genesis chapter 1, verses 9 through 13. Then God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and listen to this, and let dry land appear. And it was so, and listen to this, and the earth brought forth grass, and herb that yields seed according to its kind, and the tree that yields fruit, whose seed is in itself, according to his kind, so that evening and morning were the third day. What we see here is a veiled prophetic picture of resurrection on day 3, because up until day 3, nothing that Adonai had created was animate. Nothing was living. It was the inanimate world. It was earth. It was water, wind, and things of that nature. But it was on the third day that life sprang forth from where there was no life. If that's not a picture of resurrection, then I don't know what is. And it started in Genesis chapter 1 of all places, right? So see what I'm saying is that now if we take this story of life springing forth from where there was no life, a clear picture of resurrection in Genesis chapter 1, we put that with 1 Kings chapter 3, where the harlot 3 days after I given birth, she gave birth, a double portion of life springing forth with the number 3. And if we put it with the Torah portion, that on the third day he said, do this and live, he said. Life on day 3. And those are just 3 examples, and I have about 40 pages of examples from the Tanakh where this is clearly the case. Life springing forth on day 3. So what we want to do is we want to look at a chiastic structure, because this passage in Genesis 42:15 is actually part of a chiastic structure. Now I'm going to zoom through the chiastic structure because I developed these on the website. You can go and you can look at my playlist for chiastic structures, and you'll see this. But a chiastic structure is the thematic way of organizing the narratives in the Tanakh. Okay, what happens is the story is divided into 2 halves, and there are certain themes in the first half of the story that will be repeated in the second half in reverse order. And there will be a central axis or middle verse that is the most important part of the verse. So let's look at this. If we look at Genesis chapter 42, verses 15 through 20, if we just simply read through, okay, we can just read down this passage from verses 15 through 20 chronologically. It's just a story chronologically, but what's actually superimposed on this story is a thematic pattern where the themes in the first half, and as we can see, A, B, C, and D, A, B, and C, the themes presented in A, B, and C are repeated in the last half of the story in reverse order, A, B, C, and then the central axis is theme D. So let's look at theme A and see how it's thematically connected. And this is how you will be tested, Genesis 42:15. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. In other words, you're going to be tested, and here's the test. Your brother has to come here. Well, if we go to the last verse in this chiastic structure, Genesis 42:20, what does it say? But you must bring your youngest brother to me so that your words may be verified. That's exactly the two things that are in verse 15, right? That you need to bring the brother here, and I need to test you. Now let's go to the second element of our chiastic structure, element B, which is going to compare Genesis 42:16 with Genesis 42:19. All right, verse 16, send one of your number to get your brother, the rest of you will be kept in prison. That's what he says there. Now look in verse 19. He says, let one of your brothers stay here in prison while the rest of you go. Now there's a slight twist, send one of your brothers. Send one of your number of your brothers, and I'll keep the rest in prison. Then he changed his mind and said, no, all of you go back. I'm just going to keep one of you here, but all of you go back, okay, and get your brother. Obviously, again, the same thing. Now, let's go to element C here. Let's go to element C, and compare Genesis 42:17 to Genesis 18b. Now, it says, and he put them all in custody for 3 days, right? And now, what does 18b say? Joseph said to them, do this and you will live, for I fear God. Right there, we see that this story from Genesis 42:15 through 20 is told in a thematic pattern, a chiastic structure, where all of the themes in the first half repeat in the second half in reverse order. And right here, we see that element 3 clearly connects the phrase 3 days with do this and you will live. This is another way that Adonai teaches you that there is a connection between the number 3 and the concept of life and resurrection. And then lastly, we have the central axis, which is many times functions as the main point that the story is trying to get at. And what do we see that the central axis is? The central axis is Genesis 42:18a, which is the phrase on the third day. So in this chiastic structure, not only do we have element C in the first half and element C in the second half, clearly thematically connecting the phrase the third day with do this and live, we also have the central axis, verse 18a, which says on the third day, and that's the most important part of this. It's another veiled teaching for us to see on resurrection on day 3. So once again, we see how the Tanakh, this is not the New Testament, hallelujah, this is the Tanakh, that clearly associates the number 3 with life and resurrection. This is a drop in the bucket of the teaching of resurrection on day number 3. Again, I refer you to my YouTube playlist called Resurrection in the Tanakh. This is one of the most ubiquitous teachings in the Tanakh, but it can only be discovered thematically. Now, I'm going to say that once again. This idea that resurrection and life occurs associated with the number 3 is one of the most ubiquitous, or one of the most rampant, that's a funny word to use in this case, but I like it. It is one of the most rampant teachings that Adonai has in the Tanakh. The idea that there's an association between resurrection and the number 3, and it's all there so that when Yeshua would come and he would actually be resurrected in 3 days, we would be able to go to the Tanakh and say, yep, he fulfilled what it said. And you know what? We're almost out of time. We're going to have a part 2. So you hang in there, because I'm really excited. You're going to love what Adonai has for you in part 2. May Adonai bless you.
Enough energy, it's getting too loud for me. The room is so bright, it's too hard to